It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza, good morning.
Hello, Irwin. Where were we floating off to today?
And that is God. After whatever 89 podcasts, I've lost track, but the segues are getting better and better. It's
Well,
just
I have to. After all, people do know what we're going to talk about, but maybe not. I think this is a story that you and I have discussed has circulated, and yet there are still people out there who may not have all the details or the angle, perhaps, that we might give it today.
I think that's very well said. What we're talking about is the free life, a balloon literally launched off of a farm field in Springs in an attempt to cross the Atlantic in 1970, which makes it the 55th anniversary, according to my math, of that event. And as Esperanza so eloquently put it, there's definitely a few lanes we're going to go down. It is a story that has been told. There's been a book. There's been, I believe, a film. So it's not that this is one of our, Esperanza, it's not that this is one of our off radar that we found this story under a rock and started discussing it for our audience. This has been out there, but I think we're going to give a new take to it, right?
Well, yeah, and I think also sometimes, and 55 years later, I think it's worth revisiting on occasion these stories because it keeps them alive. And that's what history needs to, that's what needs to happen with history. Keep
Someone
it
once
present.
someone once told me history is circular. Anyway,
Well, and yeah, and I will say, and we'll get to this, but I do think that this was a moment, and these articles touch on this quite extensively. There is a moment of possibility and hope and aspiration and all of those things that I think we really need right now.
yeah, you could say that, and very that's also very true. And Esperanza, it's interesting what you just said. It's sort of reminiscent a lot about the Leisure story, which happened in the
Mhm.
early '60s, a few years before this, but
Yeah,
how,
this is coming off of that.
yeah, it,
Absolutely.
it is coming off of that, and it's. Like when we spoke about that, it was like an era of possibilities. You felt like anything could happen, and that was an exciting part of the story, really, for me. Talking about Leisure Amber, but getting into this, and really, there were two great articles we found here, and we're going to touch on both of them. And I think I'm going to really open up with a quote from one of them, which is a 1970 piece that was actually written in 27 by 27 East about the free life. It was written in 2020, the 50th anniversary, if you will, of the free life. Brian Boyhan, 27 East, really shout out to him for just really a beautiful article. I'm just going to start by this and to get the conversation going, Esperanza. Buoyed as much by hope and high spirits as it was by hot air and helium gas, the free life is a milestone in the lives of many people from Springs and the South Fork, and the dozens who volunteered over one long summer to build a dream, and the hundreds more who helped launch it from George Sid Miller's farm on a brilliant blue Saturday afternoon, counted as something to mark time like a World's Fair, a hurricane, or a death of a president. I mean, that really, I got to stop for a second. That because takes in a lot of territory, right? And
And it's true. I mean, I know I've spoken with people who count this as it is like, it marked a moment in time in their lives, whether they had a really direct connection with the people involved or just happened to be there on that day.
right. Right.
out of the 1,000 people that gathered on that pasture.
Completely true. And, we're going to get into that. Some of them are really friends of our Hamptons podcast. Some of them are people we know personally that we're going to quote in a couple of these articles. But just,
Well, this is the beautiful thing, Arwen. I'm just thinking of this now, of course, is that this story was kind of covered. I would say internationally, I dare say. I mean, it's on, you Google it, it's on there everywhere. And the people involved, the people mentioned, so many of them we know personally. It's such a testament to our community, the small townness of this place still, that we still have these people amongst us. And yeah, it talks about it being such a small town then, which it was, but it really is still.
that's completely true. And, again, to your other point of what the country was like with of its time, of its place, just to bring in briefly, we'll get to her again later, but just a fantastic article by Erica Lynn Huberty from East Magazine. We love East Magazine. And this is a 2019 article, so it was just before the 50th anniversary. But she writes, America was in a peculiar mood. It was like daybreak after an all night party. When some of the partygoers are still blithely high, but most are coming down. The country had not yet gotten over the psychic blow of the assassinations 2 years before of Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy. It was experiencing a recession. The bloody war in Vietnam was dividing its citizens. We were halfway through Apollo landings, a series of miracles that dazzled all nations. Days before the free life cut its tether to the earth, the Concorde launched at Heathrow. Esperanza, this is exactly what you said. Things were possible that were once deemed impossible. Impossible things needed to be possible. Wow.
Yeah,
She is a poetic writer, Esperanza.
really. And it gives such great context. And you don't really, when you're living these things, you don't have that perspective,
That's right.
obviously, right? So to have this hindsight context is really extraordinary.
Really, so true. And, to go back, we're going to bounce around between these two articles because they both offer really so much here. And we're going to really get into it. I guess, we always like to do this. We always like to give a little bit of a cast of characters, right? And the trio who really crewed the free life. And we'll get into how they came to the name. And again, it was Pamela Brown, 28 years old, an actress, daughter of Kentucky politician John Y. Brown Sr. Pamela's husband, Rodney Anderson, 32 at the time, a director of admissions for NYU, and recently then a commodities broker on Wall Street. And then there was the aeronaut, Malcolm Brighton, another 32-year-old. This is really a story of youth also, Esperanza.
Yes,
Right,
completely. It was
right.
my
I
thought
mean,
as well.
yeah,
Yes.
right. So 32, a veteran or aeronaut. This was to be, the free life would be his 100th flight in a balloon. And, as Brian Boyan goes on to write, together they brought an ephemeral, if not a logical, idea to critical mass over the course. I really want to emphasize this, Esperanza, and I want you to elaborate over the course of a magical summer and swept a community under their spell. I mean, that's
Yeah, yeah. And I know we're going in this direction, but here are these three individuals. I mean, yes, youth. When I read their ages, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, a 32-year-old today,
right.
what is that person doing? It's like the 32 is the new 22, but
Right.
or even less. But it's how did they end up here, right? That's the thing. And
That's
we do talk about this, like what is it that brings people out here? And there's really not a tremendously, precise explanation, except, and this is something we do talk about, flat land, flat topography,
that's right.
and water,
That's
adjacent water, access to the water so they could, go float out over the Atlantic.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, and we're going to get into how they really chose it. And to your point
Oh, and
earlier,
proximity to New York City.
that's
I mean, those
correct.
three things,
That
right?
sort of like
This is why we all came out here.
the special sauce we talk about all the time, right? And Esperanza, you mentioned how some familiar names are going to come into play. Jeannie Chips Anderson. Now remember,
Henderson.
I, why do I keep doing that? Thank you,
Well, I
Esperanza.
think because Rodney Anderson
Right.
and
Thank you.
Henderson, so Rod was one of the crew and sort of the brain fund of this adventure. And then Jeannie
That's why.
Henderson, who is a friend of ours, was a very close friend of Rod's wife, Pamela Brown.
That's right. That apparently apparently Jeannie was from that part of the country originally, or what have you, or went to
Yes,
school.
yes, they grew
Went,
up together in
they,
Kentucky
yeah,
and then came to New York City together in their
yeah,
20s.
yeah. So that's
So
just
a connection that I had never realized.
correct. And Jeannie, and yeah, like Esperanza's point, she's. We both know her. Esperanza knows her better than I do, but we both know her, and she's done extraordinary work over the last 50 years in this community. But this obviously has been. It was a monumental moment in her life, and continues to be apparently
Oh,
Esperanza.
for sure. I mean, to have your closest friend involved in something like this, and just to mention, Jeannie's role here to this day. I mean, she was the former president of LTV Studios
That's
and
right.
is currently the archivist. So she is like the institutional memory of not only LTV, but in a way, the whole East End.
And if I'm not mistaken, her husband is Bill Henderson of the Pushcart Press. Am I correct? There
Yes,
was a
yes,
connection,
yes.
which was a connection there. We also just, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but to just really, it does add a little bit of flavor to the story. How Pamela's brother, John Y. Brown Jr., bought a little fried chicken business from Colonel Harlan Sanders and turned it into Kentucky Fried Chicken. So, like, there are these other elements of to get an idea of who these people were.
Right,
That
right.
obviously, it's just such a crazy story. But Esperanza, you mentioned how they came to launch in East Hampton, right?
Hmm.
And according to Brian's article here from 27 East, the choice of Springs appeared to be more by chance than careful planning, but it did offer the things you just brought out, what the team was looking for: access to New York, flat terrain, ocean, right? Because they were crossing the ocean, and why not the tip of Long Island? Jeannie Henderson said. And I mean, just gets into the nuts and bolts, right? How Mr. Anderson drove out to East Hampton to scout it, had a conversation with the then supervisor Bruce Collins, and Collins told him to go see my friend George Sid Miller. He's got a flat farm next to the water.
Right. And to situate everyone, this is a flat farm, pasture land that today you wouldn't recognize. It's overgrown, I'm sure, but this is sort of adjacent to, not adjacent to, but near Ashua, like that area,
I
which
would,
is
yeah,
Springs
that's
Historic District, and then right on Accabonac Harbor. Is that right?
yeah. I don't know that I couldn't give you the specific address. I couldn't really find one, but yes, it was in that vicinity. Fireplace Road on Accabonac Harbor is what
Mhm.
and again, 55 years, the landscape does look different. So that's very true. Now it's funny. This flight or scheme, as they were even referring it to, it cost a lot. This was not chump change here. This was an investment to do this. Again, the Browns were, a family of means, uh, but the couple wound up selling off their furniture.
And
Rod, who,
pianos and harps and what have you. I mean, yeah, I mean, $150,000, which is really what it probably ended
that's
up
right.
costing. although it seems they committed 90,000. But whether 90,000 or 150 in today's money, I mean, I don't know exactly, but this is up into like millions,
Again,
right?
I would think, it's
Yes,
that
I think.
we talk about this a lot on our Hamptons. Wow, what is that in today's money? I mean, let's just say it's significant. $150,000 in 1970, that bought a lot out here. If you want to put it even in real estate terms. Esperanza, I like how we're going to, and you brought this up, and I'm going to mention it again, bringing in the local cast of characters. There were also logistical challenges of including where to live. Rod went to lunch on Newtown Lane, and behind the counter was the owner, Mom Van de Water, and they spoke. And Rod told her about the free life that they need, where they were launching, but they needed a place to live. And apparently, Mom told Anderson about a house she owned on Fireplace Road with a cottage out back, and the couple was welcome to use it. Not rented,
This
apparently.
is,
Welcome
I
to
mean,
use it.
I love, this is what I've told you so often, and we came here several years later, but that's how it was in my memory was people just received you with open arms.
Right. It- and and this is where I really want to a point we really need to make, and this is a point that really comes through in Brian's article, and even on the article on East. This was something for Springs. Now, Jeannie Henderson remembers the Barneses got wind of it. And we've spoken about Clarence and Dorothy Barnes on prior episodes of our Hamptons podcast. I remember vividly the Barnes Country Store. When I first came out here in 1989, that was my go to. I
Mm,
remember Clarence and Dorothy. It's now, I think, the Montauk Market, it's called now. But
mm,
I
mm.
remember this place vividly. And, of course, the folklore of trading paintings for de Koonings and Pollocks that goes with that. There was also that, along with the Miller store, Springs General Store. But so Clarence and Dorothy not only provided food and beverages for many of these volunteers, more importantly, they got their friends interested in sharing their expertise. And Jeannie writes here, they provided the resources of Springs, the fire department to volunteer as the ground crew, and they got all of their friends involved.
Yeah, I mean, it really truly was an adventure, and people took ownership, right? Like they got involved as something exciting, and what I love is the fact that yes, there were people like people good with their hands and in their trades, right? So
Right.
they would just pitch in for whatever was needed. If you could sew a net, I would imagine you could sew a helium balloon.
Exactly. And this article mentions exactly those things. A guy who owned a Springs body shop got involved. And yeah, it just really became a community event. There's, Pamela Topham. Now she's communicated with us. We know she's a listener of the show. At the time was 23 years old. Sorry, Pam, but this just going by what the article says. Um, she was living, either in East Hampton or Bridgehampton at that summer of 70. And she writes here, she's quoted in this article, I feel like the word just went out. You heard about it. They were looking for people to help out. And she remembers driving up to Springs early that summer for a test blow up. And Esperanza, you brought this up. There's a photo of the artist William de Kooning leaning back, holding the rope, when they were doing practice sessions or whatever. Just all of these stories. And Jeannie writes how Springs is an outsider community. It gets short shrift. Sort of the Springs has had a chip on their shoulders. Sometimes you hear they still talk about this.
Everybody says that, and
Right.
and then I'll say, yeah, and Wayne Scott feels the same way.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So, but according to what Jeannie's writing, putting the painters aside, she always felt, well, it never got the attention or respect of neighboring East Hampton. We're not going to dwell on that. You brought it up with Wayne Scott. It's a story we've heard many times, but she did mention how people are very protective of Springs. This was theirs. The Free Life was their event, a Springs event. wow, getting emphatic here, aren't I? And they adopted it as their own. And I think that was a storyline here, that it was a Springs, it was for Springs of Springs. Springs really identified with it, right, Esperanza? I mean, that's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think as we move through this and talk about the name of the that they gave this ship, the Free Life, I think about how this place came to be, the settlers that came looking for a free life,
right.
really independent people, independent thinkers, very self-sufficient. This balloon, it connotes exactly that. There's so much to equate between what they were proposing to do, this adventure, and the what this balloon represented, and the people of this area.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really, just so true. And I guess I'm going to touch on a couple of things from East Magazine, because we really, I think, Esperanza, we should morph into really like, I guess when this thing was sort of about to happen, we'll push the story up a little bit and just apparently, as much as there was all of this excitement, all of this buzz around, what was happening, there was the reality of really, and maybe we should touch on this, what this was. This was a balloon going across the Atlantic. Remember Charles Lindbergh flew over the Atlantic, right? That was a big,
Flew in an airplane.
in an airplane. Okay, yeah, okay, 1932 or whenever that was. Yeah, maybe not a sophisticated airplane, but an airplane nonetheless. This was a balloon.
Yeah.
Okay, and
Yeah. A
let's
7-story high, tall balloon.
a balloon across. When I say the
This is
water,
technology, right? This is technology from the
yeah,
1700s. Let's be clear.
Esperanza, when I see a little gurgle in Accabonac Harbor, I'm hesitant to go in with my kayak. Okay, these people are like a balloon over the Atlantic. So there
And,
was
and mind you, neither Pam nor Rod had any prior experience. They had started this, what, like 4 years before he started, I guess, cooking this up out. It was sort of out of nowhere, I think. Somebody mentioned, oh, nobody's ever done it. And he's like, oh, let me try that. Um,
and
and
Esperanza,
so they only really had the expertise. I mean, he obviously they studied it, but the pilot was the man.
yes, yes, but and there was. I'm going into the East Magazine article for a little bit. There was some accounts of a feeling of unease before liftoff. To your point, though,
Well, before
these
liftoff, before they even had this guy Malcolm,
right.
because the previous pilot had backed out. He was like, "No way, this is
That's
too dangerous."
I'm glad you brought that up. But putting this whole thing, we just want to set the stage of what the vibe was. As much as there was all of this excitement and everything else, there was this little bit of feeling here, and I'm bouncing around a little, but just to quote a couple of the people involved, were there at the day. Jack Graves, the star, and he writes for the Star to this day, a sports writer. And this is really what you were just bringing out. They didn't look fearful. They were ready to go. And everyone in that field, and we're going to get into that, the 1,000 people there or whatever in that field. Robin Kuntz, the Star's business manager, was a neighborhood kid at the time. She rode her bike to the field. And she really sort of remembers this similar kind of sense that, wow, something something didn't feel completely right. I mean, are we getting the story right, Esperanza? Like there was as
I'm
much as
sure there was. I mean, as much excitement as there was, she says everyone was saying that day that they shouldn't go. It wasn't going to happen. It wasn't supposed to happen.
that's right.
I don't know if it was the wind or conditions weren't right. Um, you've got to be apprehensive.
Right.
It's they do talk about how Pam Brown's father did obviously helped them out investing
Of
money in this
course.
venture and was there, but her mother was back in Texas, I'm sure riddled with anxiety about what was about to happen, and couldn't blame her. I would be the same.
And the anxiety, and I mean, you brought it up how
Not a
the original pilot was much less of a risk taker than
correct. Yeah.
Malcolm was, right?
Yeah,
And
this was, I think, a no pun intended, perfect storm of sort of coincidences where they found this other pilot, Malcolm Wright,
right,
and he was in a moment, I guess, in his life that he was willing to take this risk. And you had Rodney, who, probably or apparently had tried this, that, and the other thing career wise, but wanted more. And this was a way to kind of put his name on the map on
that's
right. And
that's
then
a
you've got
great
his
point.
wife, Pam Brown, who wasn't even supposed to go on the trip, but kind of at the last minute was like, I'm not going to miss this. I've got to go and do this. Right.
Youth, youth,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And going back to
The
Brian,
young and the foolish.
yeah, the young, the right, yeah, and going again, we're bouncing back a little bit, but I'm really going to go back to Brian Boyhan's article now again. And he asked Jeannie Chips Anderson, were there any discussions about backing out? No. All things were go. They already had to delay for a month. And Rod, to your point, Rod said simply, we can't put this thing in mothballs for another year. It was an obsession in the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well, it's like you've gotten that far. You're not going to backpedal it now.
and as Jeannie sets, and we're setting the stage here now, Esperanza, we're really getting into it now. On that morning, that September morning in George Sid Miller's field, there were over 1,000 people, many of them volunteers who had helped build it, and they came to see a dream realized. In a sense, it's sort of almost like peer pressure. I mean, how do you,
Yeah. 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 How do you back out of that? Right.
right? And, the day was, while there was this undercurrent of, wow, there was also like, it was like a country fair. Like there was a
Mm.
feeling of, all of the possibilities. Pamela Topham quoted here as saying it was like Oz. Eric Ernst, family lived in Springs, we both know
Yeah.
Eric.
Grandson of Max Ernst,
Yeah,
his father, Jimmy
that's
Ernst.
right.
Yep.
And, his family lived in Springs at the time. He was a teenager then. Sorry, Eric, we're giving away ages again. But he recalls a scene reminiscent of the many strange and whimsical events of local artists and writers that had been cooking things like this up for much of his youth. This was the end of the 60s, man,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Yeah.
It was like the grown-ups were big kids playing a game. They were making it up as they went along. Leave it to Eric. That's a good quote, to come up with something like that. But again, and there was a storm forming at the time. That was the undercurrent. They were aware of it. You brought up Pamela Brown, hardly missable in a bright red pantsuit, her fashion statement. I mean, do you go up in a balloon in a fashion statement? But, I
Well,
guess,
given the recent rocket that launched with all those celebrity women and scientists, where the focus ended up being on their astronaut suits, their sexy astronaut suits. This is kind of alluding
yeah,
to
I,
our little
I,
contemporary aside.
I guess that's true. And again, just going along this article, like Jeannie Henderson again with, I love this quote. On the face of it, it looked like they were going to a party. Like, I mean, that's what the that's what the atmosphere was. And again, it was, and Esperanza, like, I guess it was like sort of this interesting juxtaposition. There was this, as we just discussed, there was this undercurrent of anxiety, of fear, of good grief. These are
Nerves.
nerves. These are three
Yeah.
people going up in a balloon. But yet, on the other hand, you had 1,000 people there. It was like a country fair. It was a party. But I think this is really, some telling remarks by Jeannie Henderson again. You look at any photograph of any other takeoff, and no one's smiling, anyone is concerned. But in the photos and videos of the free life, Malcolm is on top of the world, smiling and waving. What was he thinking?
Mm.
Good grief. Gotta tell you, Esperanza, this is like, even talking about this, it's like a little draining in a way, right? I mean, it's
Oh my
like,
gosh. I mean, the expectations and all of this is you get so wrapped up in it. The excitement, the expectation, you and I both remember when, the Challenger and, those all those launches that have taken place. Now, my kids watch these things and they're like, yeah, whatever.
right,
And they
right, right.
explode and it's like nobody cares. But back then, you watched with you're holding your breath,
Uh, it's like I feel like I'm doing that now in a sense. Like I'm
Yes,
because
no,
I'm,
exactly. I agree with you.
I know
Yes.
like we're getting into like, we're getting in, we're almost on, we're sort of almost wrapping up the story because 30 hours after takeoff and what was initially uneventful, the free life confronted the disaster that happened. It navigated the exact course, but somewhere over the North Atlantic, around Newfoundland, there was a storm bearing down, 40 degrees west to 60 degrees west longitude, winds of 45 knots, torrential rain. Should be noted. They were planned at the time was flying between 8 and 10,000 feet high. Today, you need to fly 12,000 feet high. 55 years later, the free.
Yeah, to try and avoid a storm. But in
That's
this
right.
case, apparently this storm was the altitude was, it went up to like 18 or 20,000 feet. So I think they were just doomed. Unfortunately, it was not to be.
That's right. And, you know, again, talking more, I mean, Jeannie really, and again, we know how passionate she is about this story to this day. How, she remembers watching the celebration after, and let me restart. She remembers learning in 1978, after 15 previous attempts going back to the late 1800s, including the ill-fated voyage of the Free Life, a team of three Americans finally succeeded in crossing the Atlantic in a balloon called the Double Eagle. This was 8 years later in
Mhm,
1978.
mhm, mhm.
And Jeannie recalls watching this celebration after they landed in France. It was like a hero's welcome, like Lindbergh got. And it just broke her heart because uh, the Free Life never made it,
Mhm.
nor were the three on board. Their bodies were, to the best of my knowledge, were never recovered.
No, nothing, just a few fragments of the gondola
Right.
that were recovered. Um, yeah, it's such a tragedy, and yet there's still such, I mean, even as we're talking about it, there was such excitement, and I think people to this day, despite the tragic end, um, remember that as just such an exhilarating, exciting, such anticipation of a moment, and because I've talked with people about it, and they share those memories of it.
No, and again, Jeannie Henderson, after it was ditched and they lost contact. I mean, Jeannie actually went to Newfoundland with search crews, everything. And of course, things like this obviously affect the family. John Y. Brown Sr.'s wife divorced him after this, after their daughter perished in this accident. I mean, was it because of that? Maybe not all of it, but I'm sure that was a contributing factor. I mean, it tore up, it was an enormous tear of the family. And Jeannie, I mean, I love this quote. I mean, I don't love it, but it's so moving to me. How Jeannie wrote, "We were so full of strange hope. At 28, you don't believe people are going to die,
Right, right, yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I mean, it's like,
Yes, when you should know better. But it's so interesting because if it weren't for people like this, I guess, not much would be achieved, not much would be pioneered. And I think of, for instance, I mean, I have sort of a connection in a way to this because my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, was a one of the first pilots in Spain, and he and my father had a mentor in a general that was in Spain at the time, and this is like early 1900s into the 30s. And I started thinking about what he was trying to accomplish, and this is nearly 40, 50 years later, where he was going to go up in a balloon into the stratosphere. So like, if we and they never did because the
right,
Civil War in Spain broke out. But if it weren't for people, and in his case, obviously he was an aeronautical engineer. I mean, he was a scientist, he was an inventor, he had all of the wherewithal, but perhaps he would have done this, taken that venture and perished as well. You don't know because he never did it. But if it weren't for people like that, having
that's
their
right.
faith, their hope in something. And
Yeah,
again, I mean, I think how this relates to the East End and settlers and how this place came to be, which is a very, very independent thinking, the Bonnickers, especially Springs, right, Irwin? I mean,
that's a great tie-in,
is
Esperanza,
it's
and
it's such a that's an essential part of the Bonnick
I,
mentality.
I think that's a great tie-in. I hadn't thought of it, but I think that's really true. I mean, it was indicated by just the support the community gave and how it was their own. And, we really just gonna wrap up a little bit, Esperanza, going back to the phenomenal article in East as well. I mean, props to both of these. Ian McEwan, a novelist, I've read a number of his books, wrote a book, Enduring Love, which was about ordinary people drawn in to a hot air balloon mishap, a novel. And, it's how East Magazine writes how this image, in hindsight, was so similar to that day in the Miller's farm field. And I should also note how, I mean, the Free Life was front page news. I mean, look, I wasn't out here at the time. I mean, Esperanza, neither were you,
This was
obviously.
before, yeah,
Yeah.
no, before
You
I
know,
even was born,
existed. Right.
or yes, or read a newspaper for that matter.
Exactly. But it was apparently like, it was front page news and I could imagine in the East Hampton Star, especially the East Hampton Star then. Um, I think I want to close with something, the writer writes, and we'll close with the Jeannie Henderson quote. And again, this is, the author of the 27 East article. I really should give her name one more time because it was just a beautiful.
This was the East Magazine article, Erica Lynn
This is the
Huber.
East Magazine article. I'm just going to
Mhm.
really, I want to just, this was Erica Lynn Huberty, really at the very end of this article. This is her take on it. And really, it's,
She quotes Jeannie.
yeah, well, we got to quote that minute, but this is, I think, her quote first. Perhaps the passengers of the Free Life in their heart knew catastrophe awaited and willingly ran toward it. And perhaps there was no turning back either way. I mean, and
That's what, yeah, that's what we were saying.
to your
Yeah.
point, this is, I mean, this is exactly your point. In the giddy promise of accomplishing what's impossible, there is always the realization that in fact it might be impossible. It's really paraphrased what you just said, and I think we should.
This is the human condition. I mean, if you like, that's what I'm saying. You think all those people that came over on the Mayflower or whatever ship that they took to come to this new world. I mean, can you imagine? That is stepping into the void.
I yeah, I mean
So,
that's
and how
I
many people continue to do that through
this,
history?
this is really, I got Esperanza. This is really like, I mean, this story has really just been moving me. But Jeannie Henderson, I mean, she's been a huge part of this podcast. Really, thank you, Jeannie. Esperanza, I know you see her a lot. Thank her personally. But if any word can describe it, it would be magical. For one brief moment, time was suspended in perfection, and it was as if we too might suddenly be lifted up into the blue sky. can't add to that.
What else can we say?
I think, Esperanza, what I'm going to say at this point is thank you for today. And it's always a pleasure because I
Yes.
just,
Yes. What a
until,
story. Thank you,
until,
Irwin.
until next time. Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.